Maciot de Bethencourt was the nephew of Jean de Bethencourt through his younger brother. Maciot de Bethencourt first came to the Canary Islands along with his uncle during Jean de Bethencourt's first invasion of the islands in 1402. He would stay in the Canaries for a large portion of his young adult life, fighting and enslaving the local Guanche. He would also take the responsibility of governing the islands, while his uncle made somewhat frequent supply runs to the mainland. In 1414, Jean de Bethencourt left the Canary Islands for good. He made Maciot the permanent governor of the islands before returning to France. The older Bethencourt lived for 4 years, until dying in early 1418. His title, King of the Canary Islands, would be inherited by Maciot. The younger Bethencourt seemed to have already planned for this eventuality. His next actions would see all of his uncle's hard work gone to waste. In 1418, Maciot takes a trip to Castile. While here, he sells the 3 Canary Islands under his lordship, those being Lanzarote, Hierro, and Fuerteventura. The purchaser was the Count of Nibles, Enrique Guzman. Having made a small fortune from this, one might expect Maciot to retire. But he had sold out once, so why not do it again? After selling his islands to Count Guzman, Maciot arrives in Portugal in 1419, intent on doing the same. This time, he sold his land that he no longer owned directly to the King of Portugal, John I. This Conman King of the Canaries walked away from Portugal with an even better deal. Or should I say, sailed away from Portugal. Maciot had came to Portugal at the perfect time. The island of Madeira, just north of the Canary Islands, was discovered by Portuguese sailors only a year before. In exchange for his 3 Canary Islands, Maciot was granted land on the freshly discovered island. Madeira Island, unlike the Canaries, was completely uninhabited. An island paradise that you didn't even need to conquer. Now, with a sufficient spot, Maciot de Bethencourt started his well-funded early retirement. His actions had added another layer to the bad relations shared between Castile and Portugal. Maciot had gotten away with it too. But karma? Well, it has its way of creeping up, even if it takes a few decades. Maciot started his life on Madeira, living there for the next 27 years. In 1447, he would be dragged away and into his old life. Karma had caught up, in the form of a Castilian noble named Hernan Peraza. Along with his son Guyun Peraza, he set out to conquer one of the 4 unconquered Canary Islands. The Perazas had their own claim on the islands. His father-in-law, Juan de las Casas, was given permission to conquer the islands by Henry III of Castile in 1391. When Juan de las Casas died, his claim on the 4 islands was passed on to Hernan Peraza. Hernan Peraza had already bought the claim that Maciot had sold first to Count Enrique Guzman. After having cleaned up the mess left by Maciot de Bethencourt, he was ready to conquer the Canaries and confront Maciot. In 1447, he embarked from Castile, setting sail for the Canary Islands. Before reaching the Canaries, he makes one small detour to Madeira. He came with the express purpose of capturing Maciot de Bethencourt. The Perazas eventually do find Maciot, throwing him onto their ship and taking him captive back to the islands he had sold twice without a second thought. The former king watched as the Perazas struggled conquering any of the islands. Their first attempt, made by Guyun Peraza, was a total disaster. He poorly chose to invade the island of La Palma, one of the most populated of the islands. Guyun and his army were then lured into an ambush. During the combat, Guyun Peraza is hit in the head with a rock, and he died instantly. The failed conquest of La Palma was a total disaster for Hernan Peraza. He lost his only son and hundreds of men. However, Hernan Peraza did find some success. The islands of Lanzarote and Fuerteventura were firmly in the grip of Castile. They practically governed themselves. During the aftermath of Maciot de Bethencourt's double sale of his 3 islands, the far-off island of Hierro is retaken by the local Guanche. The sparsely numbered islanders of Hierro, victims of slavery and war, managed to hold on to the islands until 1448. Hernan Peraza, reconquered Hero in that same year. He would leave his cousin, Luis Tapia, as governor, and he would also arrange a marriage between him and the daughter of one of the chiefs on the island. Hernan Peraza then moved back to Fuerteventura for the next 2 years. In 1450, his gaze fell on the island of La Gomera, and another invasion would follow. However, he had been beat to the island by the Portuguese. With the alliance of a few Guanche tribes on La Gomera, the Portuguese had constructed a small trading post on the island. Hernan Peraza countered this by allying himself to another tribe on La Gomera. Picking the best port location on the island, he then constructs a fort, then he simply just leaves La Gomera. This was not so much a conquest as it was an attempt to slowly break the Portuguese monopoly over the island. Later in that same year of 1450, Maciot de Bethencourt finds himself in Portuguese hands. We don't exactly know how. It could have been a prisoner exchange, or maybe Maciot's use to Hernan Peraza had simply just ran out. Regardless of this, Maciot de Bethencourt was taken back to Portugal. Here he would, for the second time, confirm the Portuguese ownership of Lanzarote, Hero, and Fuerteventura. Now satisfied with Bethencourt, the Portuguese sail him back to his land granted to him on Madeira. With his abduction ended, and his return to Madeira, Maciot de Bethencourt went back to a quiet retirement on the isolated island. This time, his quiet life was not interrupted, and he lived on Madeira for the next 16 years until his death in 1456. His body made one last voyage as he was buried in Castile in that same year. Maciot de Bethencourt, compared to his uncle, was a coward. On top of being a coward, he was also a sellout. And on top of being a sellout, he was also a con man. He thought that he had gotten away with his con, but it would end up dragging him back to the very place that he tried so hard running from. Most importantly, Bethencourt supplied another layer to the sour relations shared between Spain and Portugal.